Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Avram Miller. Avram is a business person, venture capitalist, scientist, technologist, and musician. He's best known for his work at Intel, where he served as vice president, co-founded Intel Capital, and led Intel's initiative to create residential broadband. And today we will speak about his book, The Flight of a Wild Dog, an improbable journey through life and technology. Avram, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So your book is a series of improbable events, as you call it in the title of the book. I mean, you were born 1945, practically at the end of World War II, and you practically failed almost every class, or you almost failed high school, which is considering your level of smartness, I would say, is feels also very improbable. I wonder if we could start from there. Can you tell us a lot about early moments of your childhood?
Yes. Okay. Well, the beginning of my life wasn't so easy because I was very sick. I had chronic asthma, and I don't mean a little bit of asthma. I had, life-threatening asthma. I would often be taken to the hospital. I ended up in my 7th year spending almost a year at a convalescent home. And during that time, I was alone a lot. And it turns out to be a really important part of my life because I had to use my imagination. I didn't have anything else. I was just basically alone. There's a couple of things that happened in the early part of my life that really set the direction for my life. One was learning to be able to live inside myself as well as outside myself, to develop my imagination, my intuition, my creativity. The other thing was to develop my humor, because I found out that if I could make nurses laugh, they took better care of me. So it was kind of, a way to assure my survival. After I finished with that, I started at the age of 8. I went to school, but I really couldn't adjust to school. I can't say it was because of my experience being ill or not, because that's what I was. Maybe I would have been that way anyway. I don't know. But I just couldn't handle the regiment of the school system. And I had to learn my own way. I had already taught myself so much. I had to learn my own way. So it was kind of difficult. Thank God the school decided that my grammar school at least decided I could educate myself in a sense. They let me stay in the library and they would give me book lists to read. And every day I would basically read a book. And I became interested in science and history and philosophy, even when I was 8 years old. But later, in like high school or whatever, I just didn't show up. I mean, the reason I didn't make it, I was almost failing, was because I was never there. I just couldn't stand it. But something happened to me along the way that became important in my life, which was I took chorus. I felt like that, this was a class I could sing. I thought, well, I'll probably pass this class. And it turned out to be very important for me. I learned a lot of music from that. I learned what 4-part harmony was, but I made a friend, and my friend, still my friend, we had a lot in common. We loved history, we loved philosophy, science, poetry, but he wanted to be a composer. He wanted to learn to write music. And I remember very clearly the day I said to him, his name is Richard, I said, Richard, how does music work? Because I was like a scientist. I was a geeky kind of guy. How does music work? And he started telling me about music theory. And he gave me some books, university books, college level books about music theory. And I started studying it. And then I started writing music. And then I started learning to play the piano because I wanted to play my own music. And I ended up with a small scholarship to the Conservatory of Music in San Francisco, where I studied composition. At and then around 18, I learned about jazz. I discovered jazz, and that changed my life because I really love jazz, and I still play jazz piano, and I took lessons most of my life. So I still take lessons. Uh, so that's the story of my. Oh, I didn't go to college. No, I didn't go to university. Nobody in my family ever thought about going. They were all shopkeepers. Later in life, my father went to college, university, got actually an MBA. But during my childhood, nobody ever considered it. It was not even a topic. You grew up and you started a business. That's what happened. And that was sort of my destiny. At 18, I became a merchant seaman. I sailed on a luxury liner, kind of think of the Love Boat. And between San Francisco and Asia, Japan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, it was kind of scary. I mean, the people on the ship that worked on the ship were pretty scary people. But and so I was in Asia when it wasn't the Asia you know today. It wasn't, Japan was a developing country at the time. Okay, so let me stop there.
Okay,
So you can
perfect.
ask
I have
more.
a few questions. Great. You said that as a kid, you use your imagination a lot. And I remember as a kid, I used to use my imagination a lot. I will assume the personality of a superhero or a cowboy, and I used to play in the streets with my other kids. And our world were made of imaginary universes. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you think maybe kids with all these gadgets and phones and apps and whatever, I see little kids even, I don't know, from age of 0 playing with digital gadgets. Do you think maybe little kids are losing that imagination and being, I don't know, owned by all these gadgets? I mean, they don't have to
You
create their own
know,
world.
I
They
think it's a very good question. And I'm afraid I don't really have the answer. I don't know. I do have grandchildren, although my oldest grandchild is 18, so if it's not so much a child. I've noticed that there's a big difference between uh, when they got engaged in technology, because technology changed so much. So it's changing so rapidly that a child of 5 has a different experience with technology than a child of 10.
right.
You, you know, all I think about is, God, I wish I could have had all that when I was
Right.
a child, because I'm basically self-educated and I did it through books. As I said, I probably read a book a day, and there was nothing on television, but there was one radio program every day, every Saturday about science. And that program inspired me and made me want to become a scientist. And I ended up as a scientist, even though I didn't go to university or anything. So, but it gave me my love of science. But now, I spend a lot of time learning still. And I learn on the internet. I've taken some university courses, but I listen to lots of things on YouTube and podcasts and so on. I can learn anything I want. I can go any place I want. So, from that point of view, I think it's a great thing for kids if that's what they're doing. If I don't know what they're exactly doing, because all you can do is see their head down looking at their
Right,
device.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I find this out, for example, I'm a huge believer of public transportation. And every time I jump into a metro, I see people playing with their devices and they are basically scrolling to social media. Well, and I don't want to say that I'm better than this other person, but I don't go into a public transportation without a book or a digital device to read or something. So I feel like we're losing a little bit of people's learning capacity through social media. And in the subject of self-education, I mean, there are universities as Coursera that offer thousands and thousands of free
Yeah.
courses. And I wonder why that's not more in the vocabulary of a person who wants to educate themselves. I mean, everyone we're talking about what is it? All this epidemic of student debt. While there are so many free resources out there, and
Well,
you are
yeah,
self-educated, and I wonder why more people don't follow the same track.
I don't know if more people don't. I don't know, but myself, but I think that, you know, I believe that the school system that we've had, or at least the one that I experienced, and I think it's still not much different, is really not designed to stimulate your curiosity.
Mm.
You know, it was developed, the basic structure was developed in the industrial age. It wanted to teach you to be punctual, to accept boredom, and to accept discipline. So, and I think that, you know, one of the messages of my book is I want to talk about that because people say to me, sometimes they say to me, how is it possible that somebody like you, who didn't go to university and also was kind of a maverick, you know, a disruptor, you know, how was it that you were able to succeed and even succeed in one of the top technology companies in the world that was very disciplined? Intel was a very known for being very, very disciplined. And I like, and I say, because companies like that need people like me, but it's very hard to get those people because the school system is a filter, and the school system filters out people that aren't willing to go along with the structure of the school system. And so, so people many people that are very curious and very imaginative and maybe a little bit undisciplined, they don't quite make it. And they don't make it to the next level. And then they don't make it to the next level. And then they don't get hired by these companies. And then the companies impose more discipline on them. And pretty soon, you don't have anybody who can think strategically, you know, and you don't have anybody that can imagine the future. So, and I think companies know that and suffer that. So Intel hired me because they knew that they needed to be able to change. And they knew that they didn't have it within themselves anymore.
Right. Okay. So institutions don't develop curiosity, but is this something that institutions can develop? Isn't that something innate on us? Like every time I find something that I'm curious about on the internet, let's say, I can spend hours, if not days, in a rabbit hole trying to connect one dot with the other one.
Yeah, because you have that. That's the kind of person that I can tell that's who you are.
Mm.
But so I guess the question would be: can you teach imagination, curiosity, intuition, risk taking, all these things? Can you teach them in school? Okay, so I have two answers to that. One is stop teaching people not to do it, because their innate self is that way. Second of all, you can stimulate it even further, you know, and you can get people to think about it, and you know, the the debate over things, you know, is so important. You know, I'm Jewish. I came from a Jewish tradition. You know, the Talmud talks about the discussions that people had. Not, you know, it doesn't say this or that. It just lets you understand the debate and how important it is to have this debate. So I think that institutions can do that. And I think institutions can promote things, because it depends on who they actually reward. Do they reward people who take risk? Do they reward people that have imagination? Do they reward people that are willing to stay in what's on their mind? You know, is the culture of a company or any institution, of government, of the army, it doesn't matter. Okay, but I think we've seen that over time, institutions tend to become overly regulated. You know, as soon as there's a problem, somebody comes up with a process to prevent the problem. And so pretty soon you're just mired in bureaucracy and so on, because they're trying to avoid risk. You cannot avoid risk. Risk is fundamental to who we are. You know,
What do you think of these new trends of many of the global companies like Google and Apple and even the governments of the US not requiring anymore a 4-year university degree in
Okay, I
soft?
think it's great. I think they woke up. Okay, I think it's great. And I was really, one of the few things that came out of the pandemic that was good was they stopped asking for SAT scores.
Mm.
You know, uh, like that really matters. Like
Okay, and you also, I mean, one of the things that you do nowadays is you're a venture capitalist. How do we encourage more people to become entrepreneur, to start creating their own destiny? Because I feel like the emphasis on education is how to follow rules and how to go to the bureaucracy of a business, government institutions, whatever. And I feel like we need to create more people who start their own thing. And like your family, almost everyone in your family was an entrepreneur or shopkeeper. They didn't have regular jobs. They created their own jobs.
well, how to encourage that? Um, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs.
Mm.
So I don't know that that's really what we need to do. Uh, the I think I think there's almost uh, it's not the entrepreneurs that you need to encourage, because I think they're there actually. It's to provide the infrastructure to help entrepreneurs to be successful, and also it's the next layer. Somebody who is a computer programmer, should they go to work for a big company or should they go to work for a startup? Okay.
Mhm.
And the fear of, well, I go to work for a startup, I'm probably going to fail. And the fact is, you probably will, because most startups fail. But guess what? You get to do it again, and you get to do it again. And, and I have friends who have failed 3 times, 4 times in a row, and now are worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars because they built a successful company because they had tenacity.
Right.
So if you can't just have risk taking, you can't be a risk taker without tenacity. And why do I say that? Because if you take a risk, you're probably going to fail, which means you have to be willing to try again and try again.
Right.
And so I think the thing that we need to teach is I always say, it's only failure if you didn't learn.
Mm.
Okay. So we shouldn't, we have to be tolerant to failure. We have to expect failure. We have to embrace failure. Failure is the way that we grow.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think one of the things holding most people back from starting their own thing is that fear of failure. And I have seen, like, I'm not I'm self-employed, and sometimes friends ask me, "Oh, how do I start my own thing?" And then we start talking, and they become so fearful of whether the text or the font in their business card is sending the right message or not, as opposed to going out there and finding their own clients. So I feel like we are
Right.
so focused on failing that we just try to find that security of a stable job.
Yeah. Well, we don't need, we have enough fear, you know, and, fear is not our friend. Rarely is fear our friend. So, I think that as parents, parents have to really think about how to instill confidence. Okay. Uh, Everybody says this, but I have to say it was my mother's love that saved me, because I knew my mother would love me no matter what, and she would not judge me. So I think, if people are listening to this are parents, I would say, don't judge love. That's your role as a parent. Give confidence and love to your children. If you can help them figure things out, that's great. But they'll probably figure things out on their own.
Right. Right.
Don't instill fear in them that will hold them back.
Okay, so now going back to business, let's say, I see companies like Amazon that continue reinventing themselves. You know, they are in this kind of business and then they throw a curveball and they are in a totally different business and they fail many times, but continue trying. And then I see, of course, the classic Kodak that is afraid to change and stay in their own field of expertise. So how can companies keep their competitive edge, or how do they lose their competitive edge?
Well, it's the same thing. They lose their fear,
Mm.
you know, and also I think one of the things that really uh, uh, affects American business is too much attention to the stock price.
Mm.
One of the great things, I think Jeff Bezos is one of the great CEOs. It's one of the great CEOs. And Jeff never was concerned about his stock price. He understood that watching the stock price made you do the wrong thing. And the only time you care about the price of your stock is if you're selling stock, if the company is selling stock. That's the only time you should really care about it. And so they get really focused on short-term performance, because that's what really is driving the stock market, is short-term. And so anytime you take a chance and you go to another area, you know, first of all, it's not that it's so much expensive, but if you want to succeed, you want your best people doing the new thing. But then your Intel had this problem. It wanted to do new things, but it had a business that was so good. It wanted its best people managing the business that was so good to make it even better. But then you don't have your best people doing the new thing. And so, of course, the new thing doesn't do as well as it would if the best people did it. So, you know, if I was managing a corporation, I would try to rotate the people that work there from sometimes managing the core business of the company and sometimes putting them in a very risky situation, you know, because the natural tendency for corporations, I think for all institutions, is to kind of get closer, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So you need an inspired leader. You need somebody like a Jeff Bezos who's willing to push the edge. It isn't they abandoned, by the way, they've never been. I'm selling my book on Amazon. That's where they started. But they looked for opportunity.
Right.
And always looking for an opportunity and saying, okay, then let's go for it. Let's try. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. That one didn't work. Some of them are not going to work. Some of them are going to work. Let's try again.
Right, right. Yes. Amazon has more failures than successes, but they were able to leverage their success to where they are today. Can we talk for a second about the value of mentorships? How do we regular individuals find a mentor, and a mentor, how do they find a mentee worth of their time?
Yeah. Well, I think mentorship is a very important thing. I had many mentors. I wouldn't be me without it. And I think I've tried to help people along the way. How do you find someone? I don't know. I think that's so random,
Right.
you know. But I think you have to have in your mind that you need to find one. You need to find mentors. And so you need to be open for it and looking for it. And because, you know, it's about wisdom. And, you know, so people who've been around for a while have wisdom to impart on younger people usually. And as a mentor, it depends, you know, some people probably feel like, well, why should I bother helping somebody who doesn't, you know, do anything for me? And other people feel like I do. Well, people help me. I need to pass it on. I need to help others. And also there's a great joy in seeing how somebody developed and how you helped them and you inspired them to achievement.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you one selfish question on my behalf and on the behalf of my listeners, who are, many of them are investor, and you are an investor yourself. Where should we be focusing in the future? Continue being technology, and if so, which kind of technology?
Well, you have to first tell me when you think about future, what do you mean? You mean
I'm a long-term investor. I will withdraw my money like one day before I die.
you know, it's as an investor, so the way I think of things as somebody who invested a lot over the years in early stage businesses is I try to look for an area, what I call a neighborhood.
Right.
Okay. And someplace where I think that there's going to be lots of opportunity. Now, the problem is that most investors can't do what I did, which is I could invest in hundreds of companies because of Intel. But most of the people that are, if they're individuals, they're not doing this for a living, they're only can invest in a few companies. I don't invest like that at all. I don't own individual stocks.
Okay.
Okay, because I think it's very difficult to pick winners.
I
Okay.
understand that.
Okay, so you can pick, you can decide that there's an area that's going to be good. And I don't think when I say an area, it can't be something like artificial intelligence. I mean, that's like everything, you've got to like pick something. So for instance, let's see, I'll just take one that's in my mind, which is telemedicine. Okay. I think we're going to have more and more of this. I can see this, and the virus, the COVID, accelerated telemedicine, particularly in Israel, where I live. It had a major impact. It probably accelerated the use of telemedicine by 10 years. And so it's really, inertia. You have to go to a doctor who doesn't even examine you to have a conversation that you could have on Zoom, But in Israel, for instance, they developed a box that they could send people. And then inside this box are devices, and including a tablet. And then the person gets the tablet, is connected to the doctor. The doctor is telling them where to put the device on their body or what to do. There's a company in Israel that I know that has developed now an iPhone app that, looking at your face, can read your vital signs.
Wow.
So, I'm giving that as an example. I mean, if I thought about it longer, I could give you, maybe 10 or area. So I would pick an area. If I was an individual investor,
right,
I would pick an area. I would try to learn. I think you need to know and spend time. I don't think, unless you really work hard at investing, you're going to lose. You're not going to do well unless everybody's doing well. And if everybody's doing well, you might as well just invest in the index.
Right.
Something easier.
Right. Perfect. Well, I find your book fascinating. It's a humble. It's humble, but at the same time, you highlight all the stages of your life, many of the successes and some of the failures that you had. So I'm truly enjoying it a lot. Can you tell the listeners one more time the title of the book and where they can find it?
Yeah. So the title of the book is The Flight of a Wild Duck. And the reason that I use that title is Andy Grove, who was the CEO of Intel, referred to me as Intel's wild duck. So if a wild duck is flying in a different direction than the other ducks, okay? And it's available for pre-order right now on Amazon. So if anybody goes to Amazon and puts in my name, Avram Miller, there aren't a lot of Avram Millers. I'm the only one. They'll probably find it, or Flight of Wild Duck. I have a website called www.wildduckflight.com that has some interesting things on it as well. And I'm going to be adding more to it. I'm going to be adding lessons. I have about 100 lessons that I'm going to add, and essays and so on. I also have a blog called 2/3 Done, all spelled out. I started it when I was 60 years old. I thought maybe I'll get another 30 years. And I've been writing it for 16 years.
Wow, perfect. I'm gonna put all those links in my show notes. And yes, there's so much more to discover. We didn't get to your activism. We didn't get to your life as a hippie, or how you got into medical science. So we leave all that for the readers to find out. Avram, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.